welcome to my session on using AWS to install Tableau Server. Let me just share the screen. So this session is going to cover a couple of things. In part, it's going to show how you can deploy your Tableau Server environment using AWS. But also, if you have the server management add-on, there are some additional features that you can take advantage of. So you can use AWS services to house specific components of your Tableau server deployment. So that's another thing that I'm going to run through as well. The services that we're going to use today are EC2. This is where we're going to install our Tableau server environment. We're going to use the key management service because we are going to make our extract encryption external, and we're going to use RDS because we're going to make our Tableau server Postgres repository. We're going to make that external as well and house that in an RDS instance. So the first thing before I go any further that I'd like to show you is this document that is on the Tableau website. This is a really useful guide for how you can complete this process if you ever want to try it yourself. It can be somewhat convoluted because there are a lot of links within this document, but I would say it's worthwhile just going through it at a very slow pace and making sure that you understand all the steps, because this process can be somewhat fiddly, and I would say there are a fair few prerequisites as well. So over the course of this session, I'll do my best to make sure that I explain those as well, and we'll include a link to this document with the recording. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to do is if I go, before I go into my remote desktop, if I go to EC2, because Tableau server installations can end up being a bit long-winded because there's a lot of loading times, I've got 3 different EC2 instances running, and I'm going to use those to show off different parts of that I want to show during the session. So one of them I'm going to use to make the repository external, and then another one I'm going to use to handle the KMS. And then in this one here, this is an example that I built earlier. So I'll show you what it will look like in your Tableau Services Manager once you've made your repository external. So first things first, if I open my remote desktop, this is my EC2 instance where we're going to be installing the server and making the repository external. So the first thing that I want to do here is I'm just going to run this exe file, which will install Tableau Server for me. So I'm just going to set this off running, and that will take a couple of minutes or so. So while this is running in the background, I'm going to show you some of the files that it's important that you have ready in order for this process to work. So if I go to my downloads, there is, first of all, this one here, the RDS combined CA bundle PEM file. So this is something that you can download from AWS, and that document that I showed you at the start of this session has instructions on how to do that. This is one of the files that you need for your Tableau server to communicate with that RDS instance. So this one's quite important. And then we've got this repo config JSON file. So if I open this with Notepad++, this is giving Tableau server instructions, or not necessarily instructions, but it's giving it information about the RDS instance that we're trying to connect to. So flavor is RDS. The master username, this is very important. It has to be Rails. And after this, I'll show you how I went about setting up that RDS instance. And it'll make a bit more sense as to where some of this information in this file is coming from. So the master username is Rails, master password, you just put it in. And then the host, so this is saying essentially where can I find this RDS instance that's been created, and then the port number. So this file is pretty important as well. And then if I close that because I haven't changed it. And then in this text document, I've just got some of the commands that I'll be using. So there is this TSM topology command. This is the one that's the command that's actually going to make my repository external. And as you can see, it references that JSON file, and then it also references that PEM file as well. Okay, so what I will do next, while we're waiting for this to run, I'm just going to jump back to AWS, and we're going to go to RDS, and I'll run through some of the prerequisites on that side. So in order to make your repository external, you'll have to, in RDS, create a database that can act as your Postgres repository. So I've already done this ahead of time, but I'm going to explain the steps that I took here. So this is the one that I'm going to be using, SMA demo. So first things first, if I just click on this and then scroll down a bit, the endpoint here, we can see the endpoint and the port number. So that's the information that you would have seen in that config file that I just showed you. So in fact, I can jump back to that now. So when we look at this config file, the host, that was the endpoint, and then the port number. Okay, so in terms of creating the database, it's quite straightforward. We can just create a database. Because we're setting up a Postgres repository, we need it to be PostgreSQL. And then the version that we want is 9.6. That's the version that I've used, 9.6.2. Everything else here, I can kind of leave as default. So that is because this is just in a dummy one. I'm happy to leave that as database 1. This section here is very important. So this is where we'll specify the master username. So as I said, this needs to be set as Rails. And then the master password, I'll just, again, because this is a dummy, I'm just doing 1 to 9. Okay. And again, all of this I can leave as default until, well, actually, so something else that's important is my security group. So I've made sure that it's in the same security group as the EC2 instance, but generally for this demo, that's all quite straightforward. And then the next most important part is in this additional configuration section, I need to choose a parameter group. So this is the parameter group that I've set up, tab server external repo. And then after that, I would just leave everything as default and then create the database. And then in this document that I was speaking about before, it has a section on how to create your RDS instance to act as the Postgres database, and it explains the process that you go through to create those parameter groups, because that's quite important as well. If you don't do that, then it won't work. So I'll jump back to that. And then essentially, yeah, so that was how I went through creating the database that's going to act as our RDS instance. So now if I jump back to my remote desktop, so lovely. We're at a point now in the install where the window for the Tableau Services Manager has opened. And there's a couple of ways that this can be done. So one way to make the repository external is to fully install the server and then run the command to make the repository external. But how I'll be going about it today is I want to do it as part of the installation. So At this point, I need to log into TSM. So I want administrator. Then let me grab the password. It will be the same password for this remote desktop. Okay. And then at this point, the first thing that will prompt you to do when this loads is to enter a license. Because this is just a demo that I'm doing, I'm running this with a Tableau Server free trial. So generally, the first thing that you'll see is this activate step where it asks you to do your license, and then it'll ask you to register. Because I've practiced this a couple of times on this machine, it's kind of just skipping these first two steps. So, but yeah, once you've done entered your license and you've put in the registration details, you'll see this step here. This is where you set up some of the components of your server. So I'm going to make the identity store local, and then everything else I'll leave as default. But what I don't want to do at this step is to click initialize, because when I choose initialize, then it actually starts building the server. So this is the point where I want to run the command that will tell it to use the external repository. So if I go to my command line, in fact, I'll get a new one. And then let me double check that it can pick up TSM. All right, lovely. So it can accept TSM commands. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to copy and paste in this external repo command. So I'll copy that, paste it in. And then it'll just think for a moment. Lovely. So this is the response that we want to see. Let me just make this a little bit wider. So the server has been configured to use the external repository, but the changes need to be applied to take effect. So what we do here is TSM pending dash changes apply. And there we go. So it's applying those changes. And then after this, it would just be a case of initializing the server. So that's all running nicely. Lovely. And then after you've initialized the server, then you set up your initial Tableau server user. So that is all good. So that's going to finish, and then we'll be able to initialize. So what I'll do now is I'll jump into another one of my remote desktops, and I'll show you what it will look like in the Tableau Services Manager once you've got it successfully set up with the external repository. So the server that I've got here is stopped because it's not on, but if you've never seen this screen before, this just tells you all of the processes that you've got in when your server is running, essentially. And what you'll notice, all of them are under localhost, except for our repository, which is external. So that is what you will see once you've successfully made your repository external by housing it in RDS. Okay, so the next thing that I'll jump onto then, let me minimize this, is I'm going to show the steps that I took to use the key management service to make the extract encryption external. So if I go to key management service, and then in my customer managed keys, this is the key that I created earlier. So similar to what I did with the RDS, I'll show you the process that I went through to create this. If we go to create key, symmetric is fine. I'll just call this dummy because I'm not actually going to go through with this one. And then we can click next. And then this is where it starts to get quite important. So I need to define the administrative permissions. And to do that, what I did was to create an IAM role, or Identity Access Management role. So IAM is a very important component in AWS because it's a way of saying what users and what services can essentially talk to each other and carry out tasks. So I've already created one, but yeah, so I'll show you that now. So it's this one here, server management EC2 KMS. And then I need to now select the IAM users that can use the key. So again, if I go to server management EC2 KMS, and then go to next, and then this is just showing us the key policy. So this shows us what this key that we're creating actually has the rights to do. Okay, and then after that, I would simply finish. Where it's important though, so the IAM roles that's been assigned to this key, we need to make sure that the EC2 instance that we want to, that contains our Tableau server that we want to be able to use this key, it's important that we make sure that it has the relevant IAM role attached. And to do that is quite straightforward. So it's this one here, SMA demo KMS. So if I go to actions and then instance settings and attach replace IAM role. So yeah, I've done this ahead of time. I've made sure that I've attached the server management EC2 KMS role. If I don't do that, then when I try and execute the command to hand over the extract encryption to the KMS, then again, it will give me an error. So now if I jump to my final remote desktop, so let me maximize that. This is the command that we want here. So we're telling AWS that we want to use the key that we've created. So I just need to make sure that this ARN or Amazon resource number matches up to the endpoint for the key in AWS. So I'm just going to check that quickly. So if I go back to key management service, let me check this key. So just to be safe, I'll copy and paste it. That looks like it's the same anyway. Lovely. And then we'll take this command here, open up the command line. So we can paste this in. And then it will prompt me to perform a server restart. So I can just click yes. And then there we go. So it's now just going through the process of making that change, and it will restart the Tableau server deployment. So I'm very quickly just going to check on the other one just to make sure it's okay, but it looked like it was doing fine. So again, I won't leave it on this screen because this is essentially just going to restart the server and apply that change that we've made. So I'll minimize this. We'll check on how this one was doing. Yeah, lovely. So This has run through exactly as we want it to as well. So it has made this change now to the topology so that the repository will be handled by RDS. So the final thing to do then, this would be where you click initialize and actually finish setting up the server. So a few steps there and a fair amount of jumping around, but hopefully this has been very useful. And as I said, I've written a blog on this as well, but also I'll include the document on the Tableau website that runs you through these steps, because it really is a very valuable resource when attempting to do this. So thanks again, and see you later.